Alright. Once again, do some more reading out of The Eighth Tower by John Keel. The cosmic force behind all religious, occult, and UFO phenomena. And I find this to be a very informative and valuable book. Anyways, that's how I see it. So, for what it's worth. Anyways, we're now at chapter 17. In the 1960s, the men in black led me on merry chases. On many merry chases. With my usual implacable logic, I reasoned that I would never be able to catch a flying saucer, but if the MIB, Men in Black, were real, and the testimonies of many people indicate they were, I might be able to head one off at some cosmic pass and force their big black automobile to the side of the road. On a number of occasions, I actually saw the phantom Cadillacs as advised, complete with sinister-looking Oriental passengers in black suits. On Long Island, following the directions given me in an anonymous phone call, I pursued one of these cars down a dead-end road where it seemingly vanished into the thin air. There were no side roads or turnoffs. On other days, I arrived at witnesses' homes only minutes after the MIB had driven off. Their empty threats and passed along by concerned participants filled my mailbox and rang in my ears for years. From Sweden to Spain, Australia to South Africa, these phantom James Bonds have stalked the wide-eyed nuts, scattering fear and confusion along their trail. During Colorado University's Air Force-sponsored UFO study, a black limousine even visited Boulder, and a stocky olive-skinned man in dark glasses and black suit approached the head of the project, Mr. Edward U. Condon. He identified himself as Mr. Dixon, Diksun, and offered to hand over the secrets of the universe for a paltry few $1 million. Dr. Condon and his staff wasted a lot of time trying to check out his out-of-space credentials. When they failed to produce the money, Mr. Dixon got back into his limousine and rode off into the sunset. In 1880, Agastillo Junction, New Mexico, was not exactly a thriving metropolis. Today, it has a population of 150. It lies south of Santa Fe, somewhat off whatever beaten tracks existed in those days. On the evening of March 26, 1880, 4 men were walking there when they saw a fish-shaped balloon. I've seen that. I filmed it, actually. It's a shitty image, but I filmed it. Cruising low in the sky. They could even make out 8 or 10 figures in the craft, and could hear them babbling in some unknown language. As the object passed overhead, something dropped from it, a vase of some sort covered with strange hieroglyphics. The men carted it to the local general store as proof of their sighting. and it was placed on display there. A couple of days later, a stranger came into town. He identified himself as a collector and bought the vase for an unspecified amount of money. Then, like Mr. Dixon, he rode off into the western sunset. The story might seem apocryphal until you realize there were no operational dirigibles in the U.S. in 1880. The great airship craze of the 1896 through 97 was still 17 years away. Communications between the Castillo Junction and the outside world at that time were not the best. Yet somehow this collector from some far-off place heard about the vase and traveled to this remote little town to buy it. This particular charade, has been repeated endlessly since. Some kind of evidence is found at a UFO site. The person who retrieves it is soon visited by a stranger who buys it or steals it. There were many interesting UFO sightings in the 1920s, and at least one of these was accompanied by MIB manifestations. Mr. John Keel, a retired newsman in West Virginia, told me the story in 1967. The incident had puzzled him for years. In 1924, a farmer outside Gem in monster hunted. Let's try this. In 1924, a farmer outside Gem in monster haunted Braxton County reported seeing an airplane crash in a forest. Planes were a very rare sight in those days, especially in West Virginia. And a crashing plane was big news. According to the farmer, the plane was very odd in that it did not seem to have any wings, didn't make any noise, and seemed unusually large, as big as a battleship, is the way the farmer described it. A party of men, including the local sheriff and Keel, systematically searched the woods. Within hours, they found the wreck in a small clearing, according to Keel. We weren't the first ones there, though. There were already 5 or 6 men in the clearing. Some of them were dressed in black suits, black business suits, neckties and all. And that seemed damn silly in that neck of the woods. Others were dressed in coveralls of a funny color, some kind of very shiny material. They were talking amongst themselves in a rapid-fire foreign language when we found them. They got real excited when they saw us. The men in coveralls ran into the wreck like they were trying to hide. And some of our men were carrying guns, and one of them said to me, "Good God, they're spies." He raised his gun, and the strangers were all small, just a little over 5 feet tall, and they all looked like Orientals. With high cheekbones, slant eyes, and dark skin. One of them spoke English. He told us nobody was hurt, that everything was all right. He said he would call on the sheriff later and make out a complete report. There wasn't much we could do. No crime had been committed. Nobody was hurt. But here's the real funny part. While I was looking around, I spotted a little metal thingamajig on the ground. I picked it up and decided to keep it. Don't know why I didn't turn it over to one of the foreigners. Anyway, I put it in my pocket and we all finally went away, leaving the foreigners to fuss with their contraption. It didn't look like much of a flying machine. In fact, I don't think it could fly at all. It was like a fuselage of a modern plane with windows and all, but it didn't have any wings, tail, or propellers. And like the farmer said, it was mighty big. I'd say it was at least 75 feet long. It filled the whole clearing. When I went back home, I was living in Weston in those days. I went right to bed. I was pretty tired from all the days hiking. About 3 a.m., somebody started pounding on my door. I got up and looked, and there was an army officer standing there. He was dressed in one of those broad brim hats they used to wear with those leg wrappings and all. It was a U.S. Army uniform, all right. It was I was in World War I, but we didn't see many soldiers in West Virginia in those days. Anyway, except for his clothes, he looked just like those foreigners from the airplane. Slant eyes and dark skin, but he was maybe a little taller. You picked up something today, he said. We need it. We need it back. I was half asleep, and at first I couldn't think what he meant. Then I remembered the metal thingamajig. It was still in my coat pocket, and I went and got it. Is this what you mean? I asked him. He didn't answer, just grabbed it and walked off without a word. He didn't seem to have a horse or a car. I shuffled back to bed, but the next day I started wondering about it. How had he managed to track me down? A couple of days later, I went back to those woods and found that found that clearing. It was empty. The grass and brushes were all crushed down where the airplane had been, but there was no other sign of anything or anybody. You know, I never wrote the story up. After that army officer came by, I figured that maybe it was a secret army deal of some kind, and I thought it was better to leave it alone. Some years later, I received a letter from a man in the Northwest recounting an identical incident which supposedly happened in Oregon in the 1930s. A strange plane crash. Local farmers collected pieces of it, and shortly afterwards, Army officers visited them and collected the souvenirs. The U.S. Army was remarkably efficient in those days. The Illuminati, the international bankers, the Freemasons, the Jesuits, and the CIA have all been blamed for the antics of the MIB during different periods in history. In the 18th and 19th century, secret societies were popular, not so much to join as to blame. By the turn of the century, a new mythological group seized the public imagination. The sinister international banksters, a loathsome cartel of munition makers and money manipulators, and I just lost myself. Arch friends, there you go. Like the Illuminati and other phantom orders before them, they were accused of running the world from behind the scenes. This mischievous men in black suits were tagged as agents for the international bankers in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. The CIA may have been busy in Key West in 1951 when several naval officers and crewmen out in their motor launch saw a pulsating cigar-shaped object hovering over the water. They watched it through binoculars and could see a greenish column of light extending down to the surface of the water. The sea was strewn with dead fish. Suddenly, a fast-moving fighter plane appeared, and the object took off, vanishing in seconds. As soon as the motor launch docked, the naval men were surrounded by officious gentlemen in dark suits who hustled them away and held them for hours, questioning them in a manner one of the witnesses said years later that seemed more aimed at discrediting them than anything else. These silencers did not confine their activities to the U.S. Shortly after, an engineer named Gian Pietro, so I says Gian, I try to know how to pronounce this, Gian Pietro Mangunzai, I know I didn't say that right. Gian Pietro Mangunzai. So Gian Pietro Mangunzai took some controversial photos of a flying saucer in the Italian Alps in 1952. He claimed he was visited by an American secret agent disguised as an Italian ski mountain policeman who interrogated him through a long night, apparently trying to get him to repudiate his story of having seen a disc-shaped object land on a glacier. Dr. Jacques Vallée uncovered another odd Italian story from that year. The witness was fishing near Vico, Italy, on the night of July 24, 1952, when he allegedly saw a disc descend and lower a hose into the water. While he was watching, a ray of light darted from the disc and gave him a severe electric shock, leaving him weak and helpless while the sorcerers continued about their business. 6 days later, he was again fishing in the same spot when a tall, thin man who spoke Italian with a foreign accent approached him and asked him if he had seen any airplanes or flying saucers. I swear to God, I've had this. It's the first time I read this book, and by the way, it's reminding me of the past 6 years of what I've gone through. And that's why I'm laughing. And I know it's absurd, and it is absurd what I went through and what thousands of other people like myself have gone through. And that's the reason why people don't want to talk about it. But it's the reason also why I'm going to write them in the middle of, well, I'm 100 pages into the book I started writing. That was me, Michael Adams, talking right now, not John Keel, about the book and the strangeness the past 6 years. Anyways, and asked him if he had seen any airplanes or flying saucers. The witness said no. The stranger offered him an unusual-looking gold-tipped cigar, and when he took a couple of puffs on it, he became suddenly ill. The stranger tossed the cigar into the water and walked off. A surprising number of talkative witnesses claim to have been coerced into signing an oath of secrecy by alleged government agents. In 1955, 20 workmen were making repairs on the outside of a large factory building in southern New Jersey when a gigantic cigar craft suddenly descended from the sky and hovered almost at ground level above the 600-car parking lot. The object was so big that it covered the entire lot. and the workmen watched it for several minutes, hardly believing their eyes. Later, as they all filed in to punch out on the time clock, a man in civilian clothes herded them all into a meeting room. "We want you all to sign an oath of secrecy," and he told them grimly, flourishing a sheaf of papers, promising not to tell about what you have saw today. "Those of you who don't want to sign needn't come to work tomorrow or ever again." Everyone signed. Who was this man? What was the purpose of the secrecy oath? One thing is obvious. He had to know that the flying saucer was going to appear that day. He had to be prepared for it, just as the hush-hush officials in Florida had to be immediately on hand when the motor launch filled with witnesses reached the dock. These agents must have also had the necessary credentials to get them onto the Navy dock and into the factory building, which was engaged in classified work for the Navy. They had to know what was going to happen in advance. They had to have some reason for suppressing the witnesses, or the whole story has to be pure baloney. As a matter of fact, the Florida story comes from an anonymous letter published in a Miami paper. The factory story is more folklore than fact. The story has circulated by word of mouth for years, but no one has ever pinned down any of the original witnesses, if they exist. But there are many other stories of this type which have been verified to some extent, were reported by reliable witnesses and were investigated by qualified journalists and scientists. Dr. J. Allen Hynek tells of two men engaged in work requiring military clearance. He saw a UFO land in North Dakota on a rainy night in November 1961. Thinking it was a plane in trouble, they stopped and ran towards the object. Their surprise was understandably great when they discovered humanoids around the craft, and one of which boldly waved them off in a threatening manner. Hynek says, "The men did not report their sighting to anyone, but the next day one of them was called out from work and introduced to two strangers. They asked to be taken to his home, where they examined the clothing he had worn the night before, especially his boots, and left without any further word." Dr. Hynek reports, "Such incidents raise a lot of questions. How did these men know the witnesses had seen something? How did they know how to find him? What were they looking for when they examined his clothing?" The late Frank Edwards, a newscaster and best-selling UFO author, reported similar encounters. He told of a minor official. Before going further, Dr. Hynek deliberately alters significant details in this episode to protect the identity of the witnesses. Anyway, so back to this, Frank Edwards. He told of a minor official in a large industrial plant who saw a huge glowing object at 40:30 one morning in December 1965. He stopped and reported it to the state police. A few hours later, two military officers turned up at his plant and questioned him for 2 hours. At the conclusion of the interview, one of the officers said, "We can't tell you what to do, but we can offer you a suggestion. Don't talk about this matter to anyone." A feisty farmer in Ohio once told me how he had seen a strange object land in one of his fields one night in 1966. He ran to his house to get his rifle, and when he returned, the object was gone. It had been circular and glowing, he said. Very early the next morning, a black limousine pulled up to his farm. A man in an Air Force uniform knocked on his door. He told the farmer to forget what he had seen the night before. Annoyed, the farmer ordered him off his property and said he would tell anyone he damn pleased. When I asked for a description of the Air Force officer, the witness looked thoughtful. "I'll never forget him," he answered. "He didn't look like an American at all. He was a little fellow, about 5'4", and with a face like a Chinaman or a Jap, but he talked good English." The flying saucer enthusiasts of the period never bothered to collect detailed descriptions of witnesses in this type of case. The moment they heard Air Force, their faces turned purple, since the United States Air Force had been telling everyone for years that UFOs didn't exist. It seemed reasonable that the Air Force officers would try to silence witnesses and suppress civilian investigations. On May 26, 1964, a British fireman named James Templeton took some snapshots of his 5-year-old daughter in a park near Chapel Cross Atomic Energy Station. When the pictures were developed, he was astonished to find that someone else had gotten into one of the pictures. That someone was a very tall human-shaped being with a white garment with a helmet over his head. No one in the park at the time the pictures were taken had seen such a man. Baffled, Mr. Templeton took the picture in a negative to the firm that had processed it. They couldn't explain the anomaly, nor could police photographic experts. Two sedate gentlemen in bowler hats. Two sedate gentlemen in bowler hats appeared at, what is a bowler hat, anyways? At the Templeton home a few days later. I questioned him carefully about the picture. This pair did not identify themselves and referred to each other by numbers. Certainly any self-respecting secret agent could invite phony cover names for themselves. They could call each other Charlie and George instead of number 9 and number 14. These two numbered agents asked Mr. Templeton several intriguing questions, including, had he seen any birds in the area when he had taken the pictures? From the fireman's bewildered description of these encounters, it is obvious that these two men knew a great deal more about the UFO phenomenon than most amateur ufologists. Again, who were they? Why were they so blunderingly conspicuous? And why were they so interested in a freak snapshot of someone in a spacesuit? Our MIB also gad about what is this? Our MIB also gad about in helicopters. Ray Hawks was running a tractor outside of Boulder, Colorado in 1960 when his engine stalled and he heard a humming sound like an electric motor out of phase. Then he saw a wobbling gray disc in the sky, oozing smoke and seemingly undergoing repairs. He heard a distinct click as the metal plate snapped into place. As the object scooted off, he felt as if he were coming out of a dream, possibly a symptom of trance. A few days later, he returned to the same spot and was surprised to find a helicopter containing 3 men waiting there. Men dressed as an Air Force colonel and major approached him. "We want you to tell the newspapers that the saucer will be back on August 20th, the colonel told him. "I can't do that," Hawks said. He protested. "The whole town would come out here on the 20th, and when the things didn't show up, everyone would think I was some kind of nut." Were the 3 men really from the Air Force? Would high-ranking Air Force officers indulge in such a shabby exercise? Investigators from the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization thought so, and that's probably just what somebody wanted them to think. 3 years earlier, an Ohio house painter named Olden Moore took a ride in one of these helicopters. On November 6, 1957, Moore allegedly observed the landing of a large circular machine with a pointed dome in a field near Montville, Ohio. The next day, the Lake County, this is not too far from me actually, just a couple of counties away from me. The Lake County Civil Defense Director, Mr. Kenneth Locke, examined the site and found it was highly radioactive. He also discovered 6 strange footprints in the field and 2 fresh holes, 3 feet in diameter. Moore voluntarily visited a local Air Force base where he answered questions for several hours. His story and Locke's findings were written up in extensive detail in the local paper. A few days later, according to Moore's account, the local sheriff drove up to his house with some men in Air Force uniforms. They asked him to accompany them. They drove him to the field where he had seen the UFO. A helicopter was waiting there. He was flown to an airport and put aboard a plane which took him to Washington, D.C. 2 officers closeted him in a hotel-like room in the city and grilled him for 3 days, trying to get him to admit that he had seen nothing but a fireball. He was literally held prisoner and was never left alone. Finally, he was asked to sign an oath of secrecy. Then he was flown back to Ohio. The whole story is absurd on the surface. He had already told the Air Force everything he knew. His story had already been widely published. Dozens of others had similar experiences that same night. Alden Moore did not keep his oath of secrecy for very long. He told his strange tale to local UFO buffs, and it spread like wildfire. But the sheriff would not back his story. When more responsible investigators sought some kind of verification from the Air Force, they were met with astonishment. Moore's trip was either a total fabrication or else he had been the victim of a distortion of reality. Over a 20-year period, hundreds of encounters of this type were reported to the eager anti-Air Force UFO occultists. Many of them began with convincing anonymous letters and phone calls. Others were based on raw assumptions. Anyone who tried to silence a witness just had to be from the Air Force or CIA. Not that the Air Force is completely innocent, but many of their cover-up efforts have smacked of a comic opera. Major Quintanilla, head of Project Blue Book in the 1960s, once berated a Ohio police officer and tried to get him to switch his story of a saucer sighting while a tape recorder was running in full view and recording the whole conversation. The major never realized he was on a candid microphone. Other well-documented cases in my files: the Air Force shamelessly took material evidence from witnesses and later returned shabbily contrived imitations of the original substance. They have even been caught in the act of doctoring UFO photos so they could brand them fakes. In instance after instance, the Air Force has found its blue trousers at half-mast. But the phenomenon has exploited the Air Force just as it has exploited the culpable flying saucer enthusiast. While it manipulated belief and spread propaganda for the outer space hypothesis, it also generated anti-Air Force feeling and greatly reduced public cooperation with the Air Force investigations, until finally the paranoia was so widespread that, in a very real sense, the public was not telling the Air Force the truth about the UFOs. Witnesses kept silent or singled out amateur UFO enthusiasts to tell their stories too. Working alone, I managed to personally investigate several hundred UFO incidences in the 1960s. And in about 50 cases, I learned that someone representing or claiming to represent the Air Force had also been in touch with the witnesses, usually by telephone. In some of these instances, several different alleged Air Force officers had interviewed the witnesses for as long as 3 hours on a long-distance phone. But when I later tried to get the Pentagon to verify the investigations into some manner, I was told there was no record of these particular cases. One witness at the Wanaku Reservoir in New Jersey one witness at the Wanaku Reservoir in New Jersey sighting in 1966. A policeman received a call from a Mr. Johnson in Washington, who questioned him at length. The mystery is the policeman had an unlisted phone number and doesn't know how Mr. Johnson located him. Other witnesses in the Wanaku area received phone calls immediately after their sightings and before they had reported to anyone, warned them to keep quiet about what they had seen. In a series of investigations on Long Island in 1967, I was repeatedly told of visits from an Air Force colonel with a pointed face, dark complexion, who demanded that witnesses remain silent. Even witnesses to relatively uninteresting lights in the sky. The man was using the name of a sergeant who was actually stationed at a local Air Force base. The law of synchronicity has been apparent in many MIB incidences. Author Brad Steiger has also been concerned with the Men in Black and has investigated several cases in the Midwest that matched my own Northeast file. For example, one of Brad's friends received a visit from the cadaver and extraordinarily an extraordinarily emaciated man who looks like those of World War II photographs of someone in a concentration camp. This pale, scrawny, animated bone heap first appeared in New Jersey. I have since received descriptions of him or someone like him from Wisconsin, Georgia, and California. We are also troubled by doppelgangers, living duplicates of known persons, a classic form of psychic phenomenon. A duplicate John Keel has appeared on several occasions. James Mosley, a publisher of the now defunct Saucer News, has also had a phantom twin. But the strangest doppelganger experience happened to a British filmmaker who spent several years traveling the world to film UFO witnesses for a movie documentary. In Brazil, he and his camera team tracked down a backwoods farmer who had allegedly seen a UFO land and claimed to have talked with the pilot. The farmer welcomed them nervously and agreed to show them the site where the saucer had set down. Before leading them to the nearby field, he said goodbye to each member of his family in an elaborate and moving manner. And when they finally reached the field, he looked enormously relieved to see there was no spaceship waiting there. Then he explained that the filmmaker's appearance had really shaken him up because the captain of the flying saucer had looked exactly like the Britisher right down to his neatly trimmed goatee. The farmer thought they had come to take him away in a saucer. Our men in black seem mainly interested in retrieving evidence that points to terrestrial origin of the UFOs. Their secondary interests are to enhance the extraterrestrial belief and to create suspicion, even acute paranoia among the UFO believers. One of our first UFO investigators to be harassed by the MIB, Albert Bender of Connecticut, abandoned the extraterrestrial hypothesis when he calculated that the UFOs seemed to be originating from some point near the North and South Pole. Other investigators who have discarded the extraterrestrial hypothesis, studied the apparent earthly links with the phenomenon, have experienced more harassment, mail and phone problems, etc., than their colleagues who believe in outer space vehicles. If you collect a piece of unidentified metal from a UFO witness, you will have no problems. But if a witness hands you a piece of aluminum, magnesium, or silicon, all common earthly substances, you are very apt to receive an unwelcome visit from the mysterious enforcers in black suits. By mid-1967, I began to freely discuss and write about energy fields and terrestrial origin. During a trip to Washington, D.C., I was invited to record an hour-long tape for A Voice of America. At that time, the late Al Johnson was doing a series of UFO programs, which were broadcast throughout the world over VOA. Johnson interviewed me on mic for an hour. I discussed the whole problem of terrestrial origin. A few days later, he phoned me full of apologies. Our tape has inadvertently been placed in the wrong pile and had been erased completely before it could be aired. It was just one of those things. Or was it? That same year, a team from a German television station was touring America, interviewing UFO witnesses and investigators. Man, I know this, but mine is through the Bigfoot community, because nobody wants to talk about the stuff that I want to talk about. They want to talk just flesh and blood, or woo, make fun of it. It's so funny how we're all being fucking manipulated. It's hilarious once you realize it. You can't. Well, actually, it's quite annoying at first and depressing. But as time goes on, you start to see the ruse, the game, and you're just like, you can't take any of it serious or anything personal. You just can't do it, because you realize that people, I'm being fucked with, and everyone else is being fucked with. For some reason, I recognize that I'm being fucked with, and the rest are being fucked with, but the rest don't want to recognize that. I think there's multiple reasons for that. But anyways, we'll get back with this. They were seasoned professional technicians, these Germans, right? Let's start from the beginning of the paragraph. That same year, a team of German television station from a German television station was touring America, interviewing UFO witnesses and investigators. They were seasoned professional technicians. They came to my New York apartment, set up all their expensive equipment, and filmed me for half an hour. A few days later, I received a call from their Washington office. Their film of me was unusable. Parts were overexposed, and the magnetic soundtrack was spoiled by inexplicable static. It was just another one of those things. The variations of these coincidences happened to me continually. Radio and television transmitters would suddenly go dead during UFO discussions. Vital tapes were mysteriously erased. Precious photographs were lost in the mail. Somebody physically cut my telephone line with wire cutters twice. Yeah. I mean, I've had people get in my garbage, and some fuck with my telephone wires too. Stupid as shit. I think if it has something to do with a fellow human beings, they're just like practicing and experimenting with fuckery and mind control, right? And it's not that far-fetched. I mean, that's what the vast majority of warfare is in the first place. And people are dumb enough to go along with shit, especially for a paycheck. People do just about anything. So you just got to throw up your hands constantly. I mean, I've had the strangest things this year. After that one UFO, the orange globe and all that, within a week, 2 of my hubcaps were rotated, and they were on top of the air pins, right? The valves. And my tires were really flat. A couple weeks ago, maybe about a month now, was it? At least a couple weeks ago. I hadn't been in my car in several days to come out, and my trunk's wide open. Nothing's taken. And it happens constantly, these little things like that, and you're just like, you can't take any of it seriously. You're just like, some more fuckery. That's all it is. I think whatever the forces are, the super spectrum, and all these apparitions and these entities and whatever it is, it's like you realize that's their whole purpose in life, is just to fuck with you. So the best thing to do is ignore them, and if it gets too annoying, then yell at them and tell them to go fuck off. Don't get scared, because they're clowns. You start feeling that hair raised at the back of your neck. People say, oh, that's instincts, you know what I mean? He was there for, with this for thousands of generations, and for, the warning of threat and danger. And like, this electromagnetic static electricity is what it is. You just got to recognize you're being fucked with and just say, fuck off. Just like, you know what I mean? Or ignore it, you know what I mean? Just laugh your ass off and say, all right, whatever. This seems to be the best solution to all this, is just to say, I'm not saying not to enjoy this and not to investigate it. I'm just saying don't take any of it too damn seriously. Don't. And don't be afraid. And, if the best one of the things they want to do is fear. And so what if they do something to you? What the fuck cares? You know what I mean? Something's going to happen to you one way or the other. I mean, that's the way life is, right? And everyone's, it's been, brainwashed to worry about. I think that's, instinctively, most of us actually don't even worry about death. I think we just, we're conditioned to think that that's the case. And so what? In pain, suffering, whatever. I'm going to go through one way. I mean, right now, me reading this stuff, my shoulder's burnt like the motherfucker. It feels like somebody's zapping me with a giant laser beam right in the frickin' back of my shoulder blades and neck. It's physical. It's from sitting here doing these recordings. It's hard to have an ergonomically friendly way for me to do it so I don't have to slouch over, right? Oh well. I mean, you just have to take breaks and do some more movement and shit like that. And just, but my point in all this is that there's a lot of fuckery going on with this, from the other side, from the other dimensions, and from people around you. But they were gonna fuck with you anyways for whatever reasons, right? I mean, this is how it is. People just fuck with each other. I mean, you'd be lucky to find a damn good friend in your life anyways. And there's plenty of people, people have a lot of time on their hands, so they'll think about, they'll hear something from you, they'll be like, well, I'm going to work on that and contrive a whole fucking a story and lie to your fucking face. It's happened to me numerous times. People have come to my fucking house, literally sitting right where I'm sitting now, and drive hours from where they live and show up right here in my place and lie their asses off to me on record. And you just shake your head and you go, really? You had nothing better to do this day? There's nothing better. But that's the problem. A lot of people really don't have anything better to do. So it's this story, this whole thing about UFOs and cryptids and all that. It's a convoluted clusterfuck. It's fun if you let it happen. You can't take anything too seriously. And when you do have your own encounters and all that, it's gonna fucking freak you out and all that. So, and you just say, it's part of the trip, it's part of the ride. Whether you're focusing on the shit or not. At some point in your life, the odds are, unless you're not really living life, you're going to have these encounters one way or another. It's going to be a poltergeist, it's going to be Bigfoot, it's going to be a dog man, it's going to be aliens, it's going to be dudes in blue suits, it's going to be the men in black. It's the same, I just think of it this way, Halloween is just a day to remember how fucked up this place on 24/7, 365 days a year. And yeah, it's pagan, but so is every other damn thing we do anyway. So who cares? And they say, I'm going on a rant right now. I need to finish this reading. Variations of these coincidences happen to me continually. Radio and television transmitters are suddenly go dead during UFO discussions. Vital tapes were mysteriously erased. Precious photographs were lost in the mail. Somebody physically cut my telephone line with wire cutters twice. A duplicate John Keel popped up in areas where I had conducted investigations and was seen by reliable witnesses who knew me. Meanwhile, a woman claiming to be my secretary systematically visited other witnesses in West Virginia. I'm sure that's what it's going to say because I read it in several other books. in Ohio, displaying a very sophisticated knowledge of UFOs. No wonder so many UFO investigators develop a nervous twitch and look over their shoulders constantly. These games are by no means restricted to the U.S. In 1974, France Inter, the Paris radio station, aired a series of 39 programs about UFOs. I wonder if it was only 39. I'm sure some occultic bullshit. There's a lot of threes in there, right? And sixes and 12s and all that crap. Anyways, where are we at with this? And 27s. And I lost my track of thought. These numbers are these weird numbers. Like, why 39? Anyways, maybe it was something more practical. Money had 39 weeks to do it. Plus holidays and everything else got in the way. Who knows? They aired of 39 programs about UFOs, beginning with the pro-UFO talk by M. Robert Galley, France's Minister of Defense. France broadcaster had spent much of 1973 locating and recording statements by leading authorities in France, England, and the United States. The list was an impressive one, and included such luminaries as Dr. David Saunders, the psychologist at Colorado University, who has been programming thousands of UFO sightings, for computerization. Dr. Jacques Vallée, author of 3 UFO books, Pierre Collier, a famous astronomer, and even Cardinal Danielu, I guess that's how you pronounce it, a prominent churchman, and I'm sure a Jesuit. Gotta have them in there. It's just like when it's just a fucking joke. And if you start laughing about it, I think people get really offended by the joke. I don't get that. That's the bad thing about it. Anyways, the broadcasts were divided into 2 parts. The first part consisted of statements by UFO witnesses and local French enthusiasts and officials. The more advanced students of the phenomenon were scheduled for a second part. The second section was never aired because someone broke into the radio station and stole the tapes. Mr. Jean-Claude Barrett sent the following explanation to Gordon Creighton, the distinguished British linguist and UFO authority. Unfortunately, on Monday, March 18, 1974, a mysterious burglar carried off all the tapes, which were still waiting to be broadcast. That this was an act of deliberate malevolence is beyond question. In the metal press where these tapes recordings had been stacked, there were 2 piles side by side, those interviews that had already gone out and those that were still to be broadcast. Only this second pile was taken. What was the gist of this missing tapes? What was the gist of these missing tapes? Like most of the professional scientists and journalists who have undertaken a serious study of UFOs, Dr. Vallée and his colleagues have found the popular extraterrestrial hypothesis unattainable. I agree. For some time now, they have been weighing the awesome alternative that UFOs are similar to psychic manifestations and are produced by complex distortions of time, space-time, and even of reality itself. Both the U.S. Air Force and the FBI have made efforts to track down these men in black without success. It should be an easy task for experienced lawmen. Many witnesses have managed to get the license numbers of the phantom vehicles, but when a check is run, the numbers are always found to be unissued. Likewise, efforts to trace the epidemic of mysterious phone calls has failed. Those gentlemen in the wraparound glass sunglasses are just as elusive as the tall, hairy bipeds with red eyes. They are probably just as unreal. And that's the end of chapter 17. Once again, The Eighth Tower by John Keel. Chapter 18. Any force that can sear your eyeballs, paralyze your limbs, erase your memory, burn your skin, turn you into a coughing, blubbering wreck, can also maim or kill you. And an unknown number of persons have died after their encounters with monsters, spacemen, and UFOs, unknown because there is no way to collect or document any such reports. Too few UFO investigators remain in touch with witnesses over a long period of time. The death rate of contactees and UFO hobbyists also seems unduly high and filled with spectacular coincidences. Several of the biggest names in the field have died on the 24th of the month, and the 24th happens to be the busiest day of UFOs. For example, Puerto Rico had a UFO wave in the fall of 1973, with the greatest number of sightings occurring on November the 24th. The psychic phenomenon, many investigators, as well as students of black magic and witchcraft, have met sudden, untimely ends, often in horrible ways. The machinations of men in black also occur in these other fields of interest. Both the reflective factor and synchronicity are at work too, because the human mind, when properly oriented or disoriented, attracts the static from the spectrum, the superspectrum. When the famous radio writer Arch Obler, or Arc, how do you pronounce that? Yeah, Arc Obler remember light ones in question mark, was working on a novel about witchcraft a few years ago. He was plagued for the first time in his life by poltergeists and a variety of frightening coincidences. The locked doors in his home opened by themselves, the knobs turned by invisible hands, and a deadly rattlesnake suddenly appeared in his path one day as he got out of his car. He lived through it all, but it gave him many second thoughts about the world of the supernatural, which so many people regard as purely mythical. Another writer by the name of Gustav Davison produced a massive diary of angels in the 1960s. While he was compiling this seemingly harmless encyclopedia of angelology, he was literally bedeviled by angels. I think I had that one. I'll check to see if I got that one. Did I say diary? I meant to say dictionary of angels. Dictionary of angels. That'd be an interesting read too. I got so many books to read. Don't we all? I think I got it, yep. I moved indeed in the twilight zone of tall presences, he wrote. I remember one occasion it was winter and getting dark, and returning home from a neighboring farm, I had cut across an unfamiliar field. Suddenly, A nightmarish shape loomed up in front of me, barring my progress. After a paralyzing moment, I managed to fight my way past the phantom. The next morning, I could not be sure whether I had encountered a ghost, an angel, a demon, or a god. There were other such moments and other such encounters. Wow, that's brilliant. I'm gonna, I'll do that. I'm gonna save that quote because I do believe that has a lot of relevance to what we're dealing with. You may disagree, but that's okay. I don't think we can tell what we're dealing with. Like he's saying, it's a confusing message. While writers and investigators are often given a bad time, witnesses of the paranormal frequently suffer unspeakable horrors after their initial experience. Apparently, once these forces zero in on a hapless innocent, they hang on tenaciously. For years, the UFO enthusiasts, most of whom were totally unfamiliar with the correlative psychic and occult lore, actively suppressed the more bizarre reports or reduced them to paranoid rumors. Only rarely have reports of UFO injuries and deaths received any notice. Back in April of 1950, a 20-year-old boy named David Lightfoot was playing outside Amarillo, Texas, when he and a friend saw a flying saucer about the size of an automobile tire. It dropped out of the sky and hovered a few feet above the ground. David walked over to it and boldly touched it. It was slick like a snake and hot, he reported. The bluish-gray thing responded by releasing some kind of gas or spray, which turned his arms and face bright red and even raising welts. Then it zipped off into the sky, and doctors and other adults took the boy's story seriously, and it was reported in the United Press on April 9th, 1950. Charles Cousins, 13, of Hamilton, Ontario, received a curved burn on his hand when he touched an antenna on an 8-foot-long object hovering behind a police station in March 1966. The 19-year-old Joe Machado of Brazil made headlines when he was badly burnt by a UFO in front of scores of witnesses in 1969. Hundreds of people in the Paris Brazil, I don't pronounce that right, area saw a strange circular machine swoop low over the town and settle on tripod legs in a nearby valley in February 7, 1969. Young Machado was closest to it, and he headed for it cautiously. It seemed made of a material similar to aluminum, but it was luminous. He explained to doctors afterwards the saucer's rim was spinning around in the center. It never stopped swirling. The center section was stationary and appeared to be made of a transparent substance. I could see what seemed to be shadow figures in the cabin gathered around what looked like an instrument panel. He crept to within 30 feet of the object while scores of people gathered on the more distant hills to watch. Suddenly, a bright beam of light shot from the disc, striking him in the legs. He fell over, partially stunned and paralyzed. The object leaped into the air and disappeared into the sky with amazing speed. Machado was rushed to the hospital where Dr. Enrique Reyes Henrique Reyes noted there were no visible wounds or marks. At first I thought it could be snake bites, but it was not. The youth's legs turned bright red and became painfully swollen. Machado got off lightly. Beams of light from these objects have killed others. At 4 p.m. on August 13th, 1967, Ignacio de Souza, so Ignacio de Souza, 41, and his wife, Lucia de Souza, watched a strange aircraft resembling an inverted wash basin hovering above their farm at Pelé de Goiás, Brazil. So Pelé de Goiás, I don't know how to pronounce this right, Goiás, Brazil. 3 entities were standing near the object. At first, Ignacio thought they were stark naked, but as the trio moved towards him, it appeared that they were wearing skin-tight yellow coveralls. Sir Suzia was carrying a .44 caliber rifle at the time, and the appearance of these individuals was so alarming that he raised his weapon and took aim and fired at one of them, and it was a big mistake. My son is here, yay. How's it going, buddy? So anyways, that was a big mistake. A beam of green light instantly shot out of the hovering object, striking him about the head and shoulders and knocking him unconscious. As his wife ran to his aid, she saw the 3 entities enter the object, and it took off vertically at high speed, making a noise like a humming of bees. On the first and the second days, Ignacio complained of numbness and tingling of the body and of the headaches. The investigator Nigel Rimes, one of Brazil's most respected ufologists, wrote in Flying Saucer Review, on the 3rd day, the same symptoms were present, plus continuous tremors of the hands and head. His doctor discovered burns on the trunk and head, such as might have been caused by some poisonous plant, and indeed tried to establish whether or not the patient had eaten a poisonous plant. The burnt marks were in the front of a perfect circle, 15 centimeters in diameter. The doctors thought Ignacio had suffered an hallucination and was suffering from some disease, for he had no time for flying saucer stories, did not believe Ignacio's story, and advised all concerned to keep silent on the matter. After 4 days of treatment, Sir Souza, depending on it's probably Souza, I think, I don't know. Souza was released from the hospital. The diagnosis was leukemia, cancer of the blood. He quickly wasted away to skin and bone and was covered with yellowish white blotches. He died on October 11, 1967, after undergoing considerable pain. In reviewing this incredible sequence of events, FSR's editor, Charles Bowman, remarked, "We do know that excessive exposure to radiation can cause leukemia, and if the beam of green light focused on Ignacio de Souza was the cause of the onset of the killer disease, then it must have been very intense radiation, for I have never heard of a victim being carried away so quickly after exhibiting the first symptoms of the disease. Finally, if this account is to be believed, and I don't think it should be dismissed out of hand, then the warning inherent in the story is that if anyone is unfortunate enough to come within striking range of one of these objects and is attendant entities, and they should not take any offensive action. There are various clues in the UFO lore suggesting that the objects and entities are surrounded by powerful gamma rays. These same rays could account for the so-called electromagnetic effect, for they dissipate electrical energy. If one hovered over a power line, the gamma rays would drift off the current, drain off the current, just as a bit of radium drains the charge from the gold leaves in a electroscope. A power failure would naturally result. Gamma rays also do the terrible damage in atomic blasts, and the most horrifying case of them all, also from Brazil, was probably caused by a concentrated blast of gamma rays. The victim disintegrated. It happened in 1946, but the case was recently reinvestigated by Professor Felipe Machado Carian of the Colegio Julio de Castilhos, I guess it Castelhos, in the Brazilian state of Rio Grande do Sul, and by a dental surgeon, Dr. Irino Jose de Silveira. Okay, I think this is Dr. Irino Jose da Silveira. Their full report appeared in Flying Saucer Review, March through April 1973. On Tuesday, March 5th, 1946, flying saucers were not yet a subject of notice, and although unusual aerial lights were being observed in the sky over the little village of Aracaguma? I don't know if I pronounced it right. Aracaguma, Brazil, a place so poor it had no electricity or telephones at that time. Joe, I don't know how to pronounce it. Joao Prestes Filho, had spent the day fishing with a friend. He returned home about 7 p.m., and since it was a warm, clear night, he went to open a window. As he raised the window, a beam of light flashed outside the house and struck him. He threw up his hands to protect his eyes from sudden glance and fell stunned to the floor, but he did not lose consciousness. As soon as he pulled himself up together, he fled the house and ran through the town seeking help. Finally, running into the house of his sister Maria, she called her neighbors, and they gathered while Prestes repeated his story over and over. He did not display any burns, but his eyes were filled with terror. Neighbor Arisi, Arisi Gomide recalled 25 years later. While everyone watched in horror, Prestes' insides began and just what began to what began to show, and the flesh started to look as though it had been cooked for many hours in boiling water. According to Professor Carrion's report, the flesh began to come away from the bones, falling in lumps from his jaws, his chest, his arms, and his hands, and his fingers, from the lower part of his legs, and from his feet and toes. Some scraps of flesh remained hanging to the tendons, and none of those present dared to touch them. Soon every part of Prestus had reached a state of deterioration beyond imagination. His teeth and bones now stood revealed, utterly bare of flesh. Prestus, meanwhile, vigorously refused the food and water that were offered to him. Why would you give to him when that's happening? But at no time did he appear to be feeling any pain. Now his nose and ears fell off and sliding down his body on the floor. He was placed aboard a cart and taken to the nearest hospital, but he died en route. Shades of Hiroshima. How many other episodes of this type still remain undiscovered? Probably a good many, and there have already been enough to fill 2 books. As you can see, we know a great deal more about this phenomena than has ever appeared in your daily newspapers. We still do not know a thing, however, about their supposed technology, probably because no technology is really involved. What is involved is all these cases is a manipulation of energy, particularly the energies from the upper end of the electromagnetic spectrum. The stultifying, am I saying it right? The stultifying smells of monsters, little green men. Yes, they also stink, and the UFOs themselves could be the result of chemical reactions, the breakdown of the earthly hydrocarbons when exposed to a force or energy unnatural to the Earth's atmosphere. The sulfuric content of our atmosphere is now quite high, thanks to auto exhaust fumes generally and the numerous refineries and chemical factories in New Jersey and the Ohio Valley and elsewhere. The moving fields of force cause a sudden new mixture to be formed in areas where the sulfuric content is high. The result is a potent cloud of hydrogen sulfide, or where there is more fluoride gas than sulfuric gas, hydrofluoride. Individually, our monstrous and pseudo-spacemen have never revealed an intelligence beyond low animal intelligence, yet the patterns of the phenomena indicate intelligent order and purpose. We have not been viewing the masters, only the slaves. To understand this intelligence, this thing that hides from us by donning a million silly disguises, we must examine the precipitants and try to understand what they really experienced, not that they think they are not what they think they experienced. So what we need to know is what they really experienced, not what they think they experienced. Part 3. Charles Fort. He says, I think we are property. I should say we belong to something. That once upon a time this earth was no man land, that other worlds explored and colonized here and fought amongst themselves for possession, but that now it's owned by something, that something owns the earth, all other warned off. Charles Fort. Chapter 19. Stretching across Asia from North Manchuria through Tibet, west through Persia, and ending in Kurdistan was a chain of 7 towers on isolated mountaintops. William Seabrook wrote in his Adventures in Arabia, and in each of these towers sat continually a priest of Satan, who by broadcasting occult vibrations controlled the destinies of the world for evil. Throughout men, thoughtful men have always uneasily recognized that some superhuman force seems to manipulate human events and subtly guide human history. It was a natural step to divide such manipulations into 2 parts. The good pro-human events were credited to the gods, while the bad anti-human events were blamed on assorted demons and devils. It gradually became clear that the bad events outnumbered the good. So it was obvious that the demons were pretty much in control. The earliest myths of Africa, Asia, and South America, myths produced by completely isolated cultures, contain many interesting correlations. They claim that in the beginning men were actually enslaved by the gods. We were like cattle in a pen, forced to build senseless monuments for the use of our masters and even to sacrifice our own bodies to them. Many cultures continue to these ritual sacrifices into this century. Even the Old Testament, the Bible, carefully depicts God as a vengeful, jealous, egotistical tyrant who frequently punishes man with horrible disasters. When we emerged from the Dark Ages, we began to search for new demons who could be held responsible for the mess we are in. Religion slowly receded into the background, and our devil theories became more sophisticated. The Orient was particularly rich with devil theories. The story of Seabrook's 7 towers occupied by chanting Satanists was only one of their inventions. Visiting angels materialized before O.R.D prophets in every generation and planted the seed of racial prejudice. The Jews and the blacks were the most popular scapegoats, but there were many others. Mystical human organizations and secret societies began to share the blame. The Catholics muttered about the Freemasons conspiracy, while the Jewish factions looked suspiciously towards the Vatican. And in fact, the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, did get involved in political plots in the 18th century, and they still are, by the way. Just so you know, not much has changed. It's just the disguise. It's a lot better. A pathetic little band of men who believed in such revolutionary ideas as freedom of the press and religious freedom, and who called themselves the Illuminati, horrified the church-dominated countries of Europe and were ruthlessly hunted down and slaughtered. The 13th president of the United States, a fellow named Millard Fillmore, later ran for office on the anti-Catholic platform of the aptly named Know Nothing Party. He distinguished himself by installing the first bathtub in the White House. Didn't we not read this already? Throughout Mongolia and Tibet, there are myths describing the anti-powerful king of the world who lives in a fabulous underground city high in the Himalayas. His minions, nasty but relatively normal-looking gentlemen in black garments, sally forth from the city occasionally to stir things up among the surface dwellers. This Shaver mystery, which was the prelude to the flying saucer wave of 1947, claims that Deros, detrimental robots that live in underground caves and control us through the use of fiendish rays. A writer named Richard Shaver introduced Derodom in a series of novelettes published in Amazing Stories beginning in 1944. Editor Ray Palmer was astonished when he received thousands of letters from readers who testified they had had personal experiences with the Deros. But if you ask any policeman, you will find that one of the most universal complaints is the paranoid belief that someone is aiming deadly rays at the apartment or house of the complainer. The Shaver mystery gave thousands of lonely misfits a frame of reference, a devil theory for their own misfortunes. Yet it was rather uncanny that Shaver somehow foresaw the appearance of flying saucers, men in black, and many of the other accoutrements of the UFO age. In the 1920s and 30s, the legend of the international bankster provided a frame of reference for the MIB activity. The international bankers were supposed to be an elite group of munition manufacturers and financiers who were running the world from behind the scenes. A small group of so-called super buffs still flourished and believed that the powerful, moneyed secret communities, it runs the world, communities, not communities. And of course, the Central Intelligence Agency has earned the wrath of all devil theorists, both right and left wings. The big UFO waves of 1947, 1952, 1957, 1966 were each followed by a revival in the belief that beings from outer space were invading us and preparing to take over the world. Since they looked just like us, they could move into the vacant house next door and we would hardly notice. Each of us creates his own personal devil theory. Dr. Jung, collective unconsciousness was his. Ivan Sanderson's living planet was his. But in the years ahead, the true devil theory will take form around the super spectrum. As we come to understand it more fully, we can reduce its influence on us and in the process upload many of our religious and I meant to say unload, not upload. And in the process unload many of our religious and occult beliefs. If we're lucky and intelligent, we may even be able to bring the super spectrum under our control. Just as Dr. Frankenstein's monster took over the castle, the word biosphere came into popular usage in the 1960s. It means the whole Earth, including all animal and plant life and the ecological systems that support them. We now see this planet as a total organism. It is suddenly conceivable that the organism has an intelligence of its own and is able to control its many parts. The ancient Greeks had their own versions of biosphere in their goddess Gaia, Mother Earth. She bore a son, Uranus, and then had an incestuous relationship with him that produced the first earthly race, the 12 Titans. Both Uranus and the Titans worked their way into the UFO lore in the 1950s when innocent contactees met entities professing to be the old gods. Uranus represented the heavens, so it was logical for him to join with Gaia in forming a whole. A British research chemist, James Lovelock, gained a fame in 1974 when he revealed that Fortean, the gas used in aerosol cans, was collecting in the upper atmosphere and endangering the ozone layer. We are about to spray ourselves into extinction Following this discovery, Lovelock unveiled his Gaia hypothesis. He sees the Earth, its atmosphere, and all its life forms as part of a single gigantic system controlling and being controlled by the total organism. The Greeks, Sanderson and Jung, were all ahead of Lovelock, but he is bringing legitimacy to their metaphysical concepts. The ultimate devil theory, the eighth tower, is now taking shape in scientific circles. The earth itself is alive, and the earth's mind is our God, just as ants thrive in the artificial environment of a glass ant farm, may worship the small boy who tosses crumbs into their narrow, sandy world. There are actually many models of this superorganism. Our own bodies are made up of billions of separate cells, each with the ability to reproduce and each with a kind of instinctive intelligence of its own. By banding together, they assure themselves a food supply, among other things, for our bodies are chiefly designed to provide the groceries that these single cells, unfortunately, when a key part of the larger organism is badly damaged, the flow of food ceases and the whole unit dies. The Earth is in the same danger if a key part of an ecological system is disturbed or damaged. The whole organism could shut down. This process has already begun. Ocean algae, which supply a large part of the Earth's oxygen, are being polluted out of existence. We are hastening things by spewing all kinds of garbage into the atmosphere, including freon. Angry scientists with furrowed brows appear in late-night interview shows and grumble that man has only 15 to 20 years left. And they've been saying that my whole life now, and I'm 55, so they can't seem to get that one right. Not much. But the news has not had any real effect on us. Animals in the Central Park Zoo are dying of lead poisoning from the fumes of automobiles. On nightly weather forecasts, TV weathermen soberly discuss the pollution count and more frequently announce that today's air was unsatisfactory. In November of 1966, I drove 1,500 miles and never once broke free of the heavy, putrid layer of smog that covers the Northeast. More recently, I was flying a private plane about the pristine Catskills Mountains when a vile odor invaded the sealed cabin. I threw a suspicious glance at my passenger and studied the dials and gauges, thinking that perhaps engine fumes were getting into the cabin. It's those factories down there, my friend explained, pointing to a row of cement factories thousands of feet below us on the scum-covered Hudson River. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle once wrote a short story titled "The Day the Earth Screamed." The Earth is screaming. It has a virus called mankind. For years now, the mysterious entities materializing in the back roads and deserts have been telling us to discontinue our atomic foolishness because we are upsetting the balance of the universe. Perhaps the supermind is just worried that we will perfect the doomsday weapon and blow ourselves up, destroying the whole planet as well. The Earth may have the same kind of instinct for self-preservation that all lesser organisms share. As we wantonly commit suicide, we are killing our cosmic host. Self-preservation may be the only real instinct of the supermind. All of its manipulations may be motivated by a single urge. Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed by the Earth organisms, not to punish man, but to preserve itself. Our greatest single racial memory, the memory of a flood that destroyed most of the planet's surface, in some far off time, may have been a cosmic bowel movement when failing experiments with nature were purged and the whole process was started over again. The eighth tower is not a perfect creator. It makes mistakes, even insane mistakes, and for sanity or order are inseparable, and it seems order of the universe conceals great chaos. The distant star clusters wheeling aimlessly in the void are the buttons of the straitjacket that confines this screaming planet. Another sad racial memory is in the making. That was the end of chapter 19. And we do need to go shopping. We got no food in the refrigerator. My son doesn't want to go, but he's going to have to go because he needs help. Well, he doesn't have to go. I'm going with or without him. Okay. Just a reminder, I'm reading The Eighth Tower by John Keel, who's deceased. It's the cosmic forces behind all religious, occult, and UFO phenomena. It should be up by the time most of the reading of taking Inside an Alien Human Abduction Agenda. I think this is a very important book. If you guys think about it, anybody hears this, and maybe like it so other people can get a chance to see it. And if you don't like it, I understand too. I'm not the greatest readers, but and that's probably an understatement. But I think it's an important endeavor to do, not just out to just have a following or you know what I'm saying, become a YouTube personality or internet personality. But I think this is an opportunity to basically, I'm in a position where I can, I can make excuses for not reading because of the MS or my struggle in reading and all that kind of stuff. Or I could do it. I know a lot of you guys, folks out there, men and women out there, are working hard, and maybe this is a chance maybe you could listen to when you're driving or when you're working, and just hear some things you don't normally hear. One thing I noticed about a lot of this, whereas the cryptid community, the Bigfoot community, the UFO community, there's not a lot of just kind of this, how do I say this? Well, maybe it's an opportunity to all of us to have our own personal higher development, our own personal PhD. You might not get no diploma out of it, but if we have a better understanding of what's going on. And so when we hear stuff from other people, whether intentionally or not, I think a lot of times it's not really even intentional. The deception that happens, I think we're also deceived in this Fortean soul trap matrix that we're in. So I think it to build the foundation, understand why we're being messed with, you know what I mean? Because there's greater forces clearly going on besides the oligarchs, you know what I mean? There's something that's influencing all of us. And maybe Keel's onto something with the super spectrum, what people call God, you know what I mean? And or the Gnostics talk about the Daemers, you know, this trickster evil force, whether they want to call it God or not, that give us and take us away with, right? And plays a lot of games with us. And then next reading hopefully will be Bob Monroe's book. Which one would that be? Well, it'd be good. It would be the one that's, hopefully it's the one that's talking about Loosh, chapter 2, and how he was talking to these archonic or interdimensional or ultra-dimensional beings from the other side in his astro traveling, and he asked them the question, why we're here. And it wasn't about learning lessons. We're here, we've been trapped in here, and we produce this thing called loose they feed off of. Our fears, our angers towards each other, our passions, our addictions, they feed off that, right? And what's coming clear to me is that we need to focus our anger and our authority against them, not against each other. Now that sounds really metaphysical and out there, right? But I don't know what else. What else can you say? What other answer is it? There's not much intervention. I mean, there's a little bit of intervention personally in our lives. Some of us, for some reason, and usually it's such a trade-off. You know what I mean? And the billions of people that suffer in this place over the centuries and millennia, the children, I think in particular, unnecessary suffering. There's no purpose for any of it, except there's something else out there that's benefiting from it, that enjoys it, that loves messing with us and causing us to suffer. So I think, since these are on archive.org anyways, and I'm not making any money off this, so and I can't see how anybody would ever think that, the way I struggle reading. I'm basically just sharing my journey with people. Hopefully I find a book that you want, you go get it and you read it yourself as well, you know what I mean? And maybe just introductory. I know there's a lot of guys and gals out there that will do short videos and commenting about the books, and I'm thinking, well, why not just read it? You know what I mean? Why not just share my journey while I'm reading this stuff anyways? Plus, with my MS, it's trying to strengthen my vocal cords, because I really don't talk to anybody. I mean, I have a 12-year-old son, but he's in his level of things, and he is not interested in this stuff, and nor would I want to impose any of this stuff on anybody who's not interested. So, you know what I mean? Especially someone that I truly care about. So, anyways, back to this at chapter 20. Don't even know why I put this, because no one's going to probably hear it, but maybe you will. A newspaper in Philadelphia carried an odd little story in its back pages several years ago. A story that did not appear anywhere else and has never been confirmed in any fashion. Frayed photostats of the article still circulate among the cultists and buffs dedicated to many different devil theories. The fact that there was never any follow-up is proof again, some say, that the great governmental conspiracy to conceal the truth. More likely, the whole thing was a hoax dreamed up by a bored newsman on a slow day. Such hoaxes are more commonplace than you might want to believe. This is true. I can't believe the number of people who try to hoax me, too. I think if you don't have these experiences, you think it's a joke. When I didn't, before I had my first encounter, back in 2017, I thought it was all bullshit. In fact, I went out in 2017 and tried to disprove the existence of quote-unquote Bigfoot. That didn't work out well. So what did happen? You know what I mean? Because, the thing got 15 feet in front of me. I was standing next to a growing Indian medicine man in a cemetery. And it fits the description of what we call a Bigfoot. But the shimmering that is talked about in this book, the electromagnetic, you can tell that there was energy running through it. And was it a manifestation? Is this ultra-dimensional beings, paraphysical beings? Is this something that's crossing from parallel universes that we've just now even contemplating and trying to understand? What we used to call spirits, demons, and angels. How do you know the difference between the two? When you listen to people to claim that they have been inspired by the angels of God, and you listen to them, and they're more whacked out than a lot of other people that either don't believe in it or even on the dark side. Not that I can encourage anybody to go on the dark side at all, but I'm just saying, There's something wrong here. Now, Asia reason is very important, and it's good that we're part of it, but it doesn't negate the fact that there's shit going on around us. That's what it comes down to. What is that shit that's going on around us? You know what I mean? And I spent a lot of time exposing and researching, like the Jesuits and the Roman Catholic Church, and then the Christianity, and then a bit of time in the secret societies and blah blah blah. And if we've seen what we've seen in the past 3 years, now 2023, and there's some outside force that's influencing grown men and women to do some of the craziest shit. And they don't think that what they're doing is wrong. That's what the big problem is. They can't see the error of their ways. And so, and I'm not that smart. And if I can see that, this has nothing to do with intellect. There's something deeper going on. And it'd be nice if it's just hallucinations, because then, we could deal with that. We're dealing with something more than hallucinations. But back to this whole thing, when he's talking about now about the hoaxes, it's guaranteed. I mean, this is what I experienced. It's almost like you're forced into your own frickin' journey. You know what you went through. You went through something. You didn't. You're not batshit crazy, and there's something wrong with you. And there's millions of you out there, probably billions, and most people keep their mouths shut because of the how complicated and disturbing it is. And there are consequences. I mean, I'm willing to pay the consequences because I desire the truth. And but it's been a painful journey, to say the least, and I've lost a whole lot of people along the way. And I never wanted any of that. In fact, I'm the type of person that wants people to love me, right? But it's not happening. And so you just have to say, well, what's more important? Me being a phony or me just throwing myself out there, you know what I mean? The good, bad, and the ugly. And there's an awful lot of ugly. So, anyways, thank goodness there's some beautiful and some good there too. And I don't know about me personally, but there's some beautiful and wonderful people out there, even if they are confused. So, because all of us are. So it's not really much of a statement to say they're confused. Anyone who thinks they're not, is not been paying attention to themselves and what's really going on around them. Denial is not going to fix the problem. Projecting is not going to fix the problem. And it's a collective problem, isn't it? We all know that this could be much better. We all know that. Even the most corrupt and dark of us know this. The things could be much better. Most of us fall into this super spectrum, this matrix, the soul trap matrix, and just go along with it out of desperation, and we throw up our hands and don't know what else to do. But I think we have to fight this shit. I honestly think also that if we don't learn to fight this shit here, it's going to be worse on the other side. From what I'm reading, what I'm observing. So if you're not prepared to deal with the darkness and the love bombing and the facade and the phoniness here, I don't think you'll be able to have the and I think it'll take, and if you really pay attention to what's happening there, and all these other people that have these alleged intrusions and abductions with these quote-unquote aliens, which I believe is a misnomer. I don't think they're aliens. I think they've been around here all along, interacting with us and our ancestors. They're part of this creation. I don't think they're really from something outside. There's no evidence that I've found yet. Some people claim it is, that they come from some distant star, and all, but just claiming that doesn't mean it's so. And we know that, right? Deep down inside, we know that. So then what the hell are we doing with? You know what I mean? Is it nothing more than some biochemical, electrical impulses and going on within inside us? And is that all it really is? I don't believe that. I don't want to believe that. I don't accept that. But that doesn't mean I'm right. That's the problem. Anyways, I could get way off here. Let's get back into this reading. Okay, so we talk about these different devil theories. The fact that there was never any follow-up to this proof again. So, some say that the great governmental conspiracy to conceal the truth. More likely, the whole thing was a hoax dreamed up by a bored newsman on a slow day. Such hoaxes are more commonplace than you might want to believe. Some are concocted by mischievous teletype operators working at night shift. A lot of people like that. Others are planned by April Fool's Day issues and spread among Fortean minus. Is that a minions, is it? It's minus the date. Spread among Forteans minus the date. In other words, the gossip. Whatever the case, the yarn excited devil theorists everywhere. Does that make sense? Whatever the case, the yarn excited devil theorists everywhere. Interesting wording. It told how an unnamed scientific expedition of unnamed scientists were exploring Greenland with special instruments when they detected a massive object buried deep under the ice. Oh, I remember this. It was rectangular and appeared to be construction of some kind. But what really stirred the scientists, according to the story, was the fact that the thing was emitting radio signals. The implications were staggering. A huge electronic device existed in barren Greenland, planted so deep in the ice that it must have been there hundreds, even thousands of years. Who put it there, and what was it broadcasting to? This is the thing too about dating. I don't take any of it too seriously, and I'm sure most of you don't as well. How the hell do we know how old any of this shit is? Outside of organic material, these rocks, there's a lot of it's a guess. We're getting better at it. But the last major cataclysmic event, did it happen 12,000 years ago, like a lot of people say? Was it 10,000? Was it 6,000? Was it 60,000? I don't know how you... At some point, I think it gets lost. And I think it's part of this creation, too, which I hope I'm wrong. I hope eventually there is some true, accurate dating in the past, and maybe in the future. I think not until we truly have the ability... demonstrably ability to time travel, and we're going to know what anything was like before and in the future. Hell, we have a hard enough time figuring out what's going on right in our own present. We think we know what's going on, but the propaganda apparatuses in our countries, they're not there to tell us the whole truth. They're there to steer us and push the official narratives, not the truth. So we're all in the same boat, and but I think it's funny when we start figuring these dates out. Anyways, the UFO cultists presumed that it was work of extraterrestrials and was sending Tellurian weather reports to some receiver in Andromeda. The Atlanteologists speculated that it was the legendary power transmitter of Lost Atlantis. Walter Burles, a member of a tiny band of Atlantis researchers, has suggested that the hundreds of ships and planes that have vanished inexplicably in the notorious Bermuda Triangle were the victims of that ancient crystalline power source, a true eighth tower now boiling away under hundreds of fathoms of ocean. However, one of the truths of the Earth's organism is that it has always been surrounded by mysterious organized radio signals As soon as we applied our feeble brains to the problem of radio telepathy, we detected these powerful signals. But they may have been the same signals that fed Moses' brass snake bite machine and transmitted prophecies of the future to the breastplates and the amulets of the ancient priests. Back in 1899, a tall spar man named Nikola Tesla built a strange-looking tower on a 6,000 foot mountain side of Colorado Springs, Colorado. Tesla was a genius, way ahead of his time. Among other things, he invented alternating current, and that summer he was experimenting with radio. The only radio transmitter in existence anywhere on the planet in 1899 was Marconi's primitive apparatus located in Europe. It used long waves and had a range of about 50 miles. Nevertheless, Tesla's receiver picked up organized intelligent signals from somewhere. I was familiar, of course, with such electrical disturbances as are produced by the sun, aurora borealis, and the earth currents, he later wrote, and I was as sure as I could be of any fact that these variations were due to none of these causes. The feeling is constantly growing on me that I had been the first to hear the greeting of one planet to another. 20 years later, following the war to end all wars, Marconi publicly announced that his receiving stations had also been picking up unidentified signals from unknown sources, and like Tesla, he speculated they might be coming from outer space. The phantom signals persisted, and often coming in with such power they seemed to be broadcast from someplace very close to the receiver, not from outer space. Innumerable scientific projects were set up to study these signals in the 1920s, but their source was never pinpointed. On occasion, their intensity was measured, and it was found that they were more powerful than any known man-made transmitters then in existence. Interest in the signals ran so high that on August 24, 1924, there's that 24 again, all government, commercial, and ham radio stations voluntarily shut down their transmitters and listened. Around the world, men bent over their crude receivers and pressed their earphones against their heads, listening to the strange signals. Dr. David Todd sat in the Naval Observatory watching a device called the Jenkins radio camera as it spewed out a moving strip of photographic paper. When the strip was developed, it was covered with eerie images, not dots and dashes, but tiny drawings of human-like faces. The Jenkins machine was technically incapable of producing such drawings. In the 1930s, experimenters discovered that radio waves were pouring in on us from distant stars, and the science of radio astronomy was born. Today, the world is covered with huge dish-shaped antennas, listening to the static and noises from deep space. The cosmic hoaxer who drew those faces on Dr. Todd's paper strip is still with us. All kinds of curious radio hoaxes are reported each year. NASA's highly directional space radios using ultra-high frequencies, UHF, have been plagued by everything from Indian war whoops, to the sounds of fire sirens, and astronauts on their way to the moon have listened to strange music and mysterious voices on channels reserved exclusively for space transmissions. Very few impish amateurs could afford the equipment necessary for these hoaxes. Even more curious, the phantom radio broadcasters somehow managed to fake broadcast from doomed planets and ships, particularly in that stretch of the Atlantic known as the Bermuda Triangle. These broadcasts are picked up hours, even days, after the ship or plane has gone down. There are dozens of these incidences. For example, when the submarine Scorpion suddenly sank in 1968, naval installations received signals on the exclusive very low frequency VLF channel used by nuclear subs. The signals used the proper and secret naval code and were triangulated. A simple technique for pinpointing the location of the source. Ships and planes were rushed to the empty spot on the ocean that had produced the signals. Months later, the wreckage of the Scorpion was found on the ocean bottom hundreds of miles away from that spot. Naval officials vaguely termed the signals hoaxes. What kind of hoaxes? Had some enterprising joker loaded a rare and expensive VLF transmitter into a boat together with a copy of the U.S. Navy secret code book, sailed out into the middle of the Atlantic, broadcast his phony signals, then somehow eluded the massive search fleet that rushed to the scene? If you watch your daily newspapers closely, the next time, and sadly there will be a next time, there is a naval disaster in the Atlantic, you will almost certainly find a mention of mysterious radio signals received by the Coast Guard, Navy, and private operators. A day after the Aneta, a freighter, sank in March 1973, our phantom broadcaster was sending messages in the Aneta's name. The National Bureau of Standards has taken a special interest in these URSATs broadcasts for years. What is an URSAT? I don't know what the hell that is. Let's find out what that means. I don't even know if I'm saying it right, to be honest with you. URSATs. Hopefully, I just find the meaning and I have to also let me know what it means. URSAT. URSAT is a German loan word that means an artificial and inferior substance or imitation.
Airsats.
Airsats, and I sure didn't say it right. It's airsats, not airsats. Airsats. Made to use as a substitute, typically an inferior one. So an inferior substitute. Airsats. It's one thing about reading, you learn new words. Just can remember them, that's the thing, you know what I mean? Fuck. I remember where was that? I know it was pretty damn close. Aneta, freighter, broadcaster. Okay, the National Bureau of Standards has taken a special interest in these airsats, fake imitations or poor substitute broadcasts for years. They have gone so far as to mount special ultrasonic microphones along the edge of the Bermuda Triangle. They picked up freakish whispering sounds, and they have installed special VLF receivers in the Arctic and the Antarctic. On May 7th, 1965, Carl Robert Dish, the young scientist manning the VLF receiver in Antarctica, left his post to walk a few yards to a nearby building. Yes, and he was never seen again. The other scientists, based in that bleak and hospitable spot, conducted an extensive search without finding a trace of him. His dog Gus took off the following day and also vanished. In 1969, NASA launched a Daddy Long Legs. That's right, Daddy Long Legs radio astronomy satellite into an orbit 3,640 miles. Of course it would be. Maybe it doesn't mean anything to you, but let's see, as clear as day. Anyways, 3,640,000 miles above the Earth. As it passed over the icy waters of the Antarctic, its sophisticated gear intercepted a powerful burst of radio energy below 10 megahertz in the VLF range. Dr. Robert G. Stone, project scientist for the satellite, said the signals were picked up on 3 different passes over a spot between Antarctica and New Zealand. Isn't that interesting? That eventually, remember the giant earthquake that they ended up having? There's tsunami and all that. They got Project Blue Beam, and then there's Project Green Beam. I think that's what it's called. Project Green Beam? Whatever. It's just, I don't know. I just heard it. Just hearsay, for gossip, for all I know. They came in quick bursts, seemingly as directional as a laser beam. In other words, the Earth is not only being bathed in all manner of radio signals from space, it is also answering some of these signals with its own natural energies. Or is the Atlantis power transmitter located in the Antarctica? Other satellites have detected peculiar gravitational anomalies off the coast of the Philippine Islands, and funny radio signals have been picked up everywhere from Vietnam to the heart of New York City. It is common for a public address system in schools and churches to suddenly go haywire and produce loud voices calling off numbers inanely. What is inanely? I'm going to learn that word too. Inane. Can't remember what it means. Should know what it means. But you know how it is. Maybe you don't. Maybe you have a better memory. Most of you, I hope, have a better memory than I do. Merely silly. That's what it is. Inane. Is a way that is extremely silly and has no real meaning or importance. Inanely. Usually the listeners assume that the equipment is picking up the calls of taxi companies. Even sound movie projectors and tape recorders have intercepted these bizarre signals. Having heard them myself, I can testify that they are not taxi broadcasts, nor could such equipment pick up taxi broadcasts. The signals have to be in VLF range to be received by non-receivers without detectors and rectifiers like PA systems. But this poses another problem. Voice transmissions are very difficult in the lower VLF range, and Morse code and teletype are used by government transmitters. VLF penetrates water and is used to conduct our nuclear submarines. Not to contact our nuclear submarines. Equally peculiar are the weird signals that frequently show up on television sets. Television sound is broadcast on FM frequency modulation channels. It is virtually impossible for a TV set to receive a broadcast from a taxi company or a ham operator. Some people have reported hearing voices from their TV sets directed to them personally. In some cases, strange, unearthly images have replaced the program being watched. Radio sets that were completely turned off at the time have suddenly boomed with a phantom voice. Perhaps the cones of the loudspeakers were activated by a beam of VLF waves from somewhere nearby. Readers of UFO lore are familiar with hundreds of cases of this sort in the past 30 years. Beginning in the 1950s, ham radio operators around the world began to have bizarre experiences with these phantom broadcasts. Some hams even went on to become contactees by following instructions received over their sets. This is for going further. Vincent Gaddis, when TV tunes to another dimension, probe the unknown. I'm gonna look that up. Maybe there's something written up about it that they can. When TV tunes to another dimension. There's so much stuff. When you read, you just find more and more stuff you need to read. You realize how little you frickin' know when you start reading. At least I do. I don't know if, you know what I mean? Anyways. At one point, the Federal Communications Commission declared it to be illegal to attempt to converse with these unlicensed transmitters. A ham could lose his license if he tried to talk with Mars. Mysterious telephone calls also play a major role in the many UFO and occult incidences. Apparently, the phenomenon can selectively interfere with any kind of electrical apparatus on this planet. The minor magnetic fields around telephone lines can be manipulated by VLF waves, and the monotone metallic voices that harass so many participants probably do not come from some distant telephone. Efforts to trace such calls have always failed, but are produced by an intelligently guided beam of electromagnetic energy. Today, the countryside is dotted with microwave relay towers that broadcast long-distance phone calls from one tower to another. Our hypothetical EM force could simply alter the frequencies of those microwaves to reproduce its own message. There have been an exceptional number of UFO sightings around the relay towers and long-distance radio transmission towers. Instead of seeking a free lunch of man-made energy, as some researchers have suggested, the blobs of luminous energy may have been placing calls and cheating the omnipresent AT&T out of tolls. Phone calls imitating the voices of deceased persons are becoming more and more common. They are undoubtedly produced by the same phenomena that passes along amazingly accurate prophecies to me in the 1960s, and which even imitated my own voice on several occasions. How far does this phenomenon dare go? Was Adolf Hitler actually sleeping peacefully in his bomb shelter while his generals were receiving phone calls from that familiar hysterical voice screaming, "Burn Paris, flood the Berlin subways, kill everybody"? Where does our reality end and the super reality of the super spectrum begin? The two seem to be so intermixed that separation is impossible, and as we plummet headlong into the Aquarian age, it is becoming more and more difficult to discern any separation point. In other ages, the two space-time continuums overlapped and produced times of magic and religious miracles. Man's earliest myths seem to be describing a time of mixed realities. Today, with tall, hairy monsters stomping about in the countryside and glowing spheres hovering in the night sky, we seem to be twirling into a strange new land, perhaps into a dark age ruled by the madness of force without physical form but able to reach us and communicate with us through our own playthings. Chapter 21. Until the last century, most Christians believed that the human race was only about 6,000 years old, the period covered by the Bible. Now we know that the earth is at least 3 billion years old, and remnants of human skulls have been found in Africa and elsewhere dating back at least 5 million years. Sure, modern man is really not very different physically and mentally from the men who farmed the Indus Valley 5,000 years ago. Our cumulative knowledge is greater, of course, and we have skills that would mystify our ancestors, but we are still the same basic animal that sat in the mouth of caves and watched the dinosaurs stroll by. Does it seem logical that our ancient brethren were content to sit in those caves for millions of years without making any progress in any direction, and then very suddenly, in a mere 2,000 years or so, rise from horse-drawn carts to lunar rockets? Is it more probable that many great civilizations blossomed and died here in the past 5 million years? Some of these civilizations need not have been comprised of humans, as we now know humans to be. They could have been giants. There is considerable evidence that a race of giants once inhabited the earth. Or they could have been a life form so alien to us, or from us, and so much more intelligent than us that our direct ancestors hid from them in the caves and regarded them as fearsome gods when they flashed overhead in their wonderful flying machines. Cave paintings of UFO-type objects and strange beings have been found throughout Africa, Asia, France, and Australia. Some have been dated at about 40,000 years. These super earthlings, let's call them the Titans, could have erected some of the gigantic stone structures that baffle modern archaeologists. But the Earth, they know, was certainly radically different from the planet we live on today. Great cataclysms and cosmic catastrophes have occurred in the past 4 million years, and the Arctic Circle and Greenland may once have been on the equator. Fossils and seashells found in the heart of Africa's Sahara Desert indicate that the barren land was once underwater. There is evidence that the frozen continent of Antarctica may once have been a richly vegetated land located where Florida is now. Or excuse me, where Florida now sits. I don't know where the dyslexia. Words just show up. They're not there. And like, how did that happen? Perhaps the Titans built the eighth tower, a kind of electronic time capsule that continues to function purposelessly millions of years later. Perhaps scattered survivors of those early civilizations became the gods of modern man, visiting the temples on top of their pyramids to deflower the sacred virgins and produce a new strain. The Bible tells us that the gods sired mighty men who became famous in their own period of history. At the beginning of the modern epochs, about 5,000 years ago, this planet was divided into 20 or 30 kingdoms. The children of those ladies on those golden beds became kings by divine right. First, according to tradition, the gods ruled over us directly, teaching us agriculture, giving us laws. Then they withdrew and visiting us occasionally to bed down with mortal women and pass their powers on to their children. These children, though ever mindful of their godly heritage, were mortal and corrupt and often abusive of their powers. To protect their wealth and property, they indulged in breeding, one royal family marrying into another. At first, their blood actually ran blue, just like their peers. Hence the term blue blood, and the fact that even today some royal families suffer from hemophilia. Their blood won't coagulate. The 20 or 30 females who ruled the world owned it, and they had absolute power, the power of life and death over the people who lived in their kingdoms, a power handed down to them from shoot, I hit it. Handed down from the age of the gods. So every person on this planet was a slave owned by the mysterious gods through their mortal successors. And I heard something about pharaohs, and that originally the pharaohs were all females, and the males were actually kings, not pharaohs. And if this is true, that there was a matriarchal system, not a patriarchal system, just a few thousand years ago. It was maybe 4,000 or 5,000. Who knows? I don't know. I don't know how to even prove that, but that's what I heard. So, as time passed, the real gods disappeared altogether, or their visits became less and less frequent. Rule was transferred to their children, and being at least half mortal, those little kings were vulnerable to human folly, conspiracies, assassinations, and death on the battlefield. An important part of every future king's training, even into modern times, was occultism. They were taught secret details about the supernatural forces that ran the world. Their role, they learned, was to obey those forces and acquiesce to the needs of some long-range cosmic plan. With the gods gone, a select group of non-royal men mastered the secrets of the superspectrum and even learned to communicate with it. They conjured up entities and had visions of the future, and when their prophecies came true, The populace gathered around them, and they organized religions. In some kingdoms, they became more important than the king himself. Religious texts, including the Bible, describe how people consulted the special breastplates worn by the priest, and were those plates some form of radio receiver tuned into the eighth tower of the Titans. The gods were gone, but their melody lingered on. Because few kings have the psychic abilities or magical talents necessary to communicate with the superspectrum, the priests gradually assumed greater importance and usurped much of the royal authority. Somewhere about 3000 BC, mankind's dependence on magic led to the first Dark Age, an age now shrouded in mist of legend, when the gods ruled through magic and witchcraft, and the common people lived in an environment of dark terrors. This was the time of dragons, the loathsome monsters and demons. The children of the gods were disposed by high priests and sorcerers who established themselves as false gods. It was an age of political intrigue, when true learning was driven underground and histories were written to suit the whimsies of the mad dictators. All that remains of that period are the enigmatic carvings of Babylon and the tangible mythologies of China. The first Dark Age ended abruptly with a cataclysm that nearly destroyed the earth and was impressed into the oral memories of all tribes and races as the Great Flood. There were days of total darkness when the light from the sun was mysteriously suppressed, and man suffered such great How's it going, buddy?
Fine.
I can't say the word. And great lethargy. So let me try this again. There were days of total darkness when the lights from the sun was mysteriously suppressed, and man suffered such great lethargy they could not stir. This was probably a time when the planet rocketed on its axis and may even have altered its orbit affected perhaps by some interloping cosmic body that crashed through our solar system somewhere between Earth and the Sun. Correlative legends of this awesome period have survived in many isolated cultures. The Egyptians may have built the Great Pyramid in anticipation of the event and used it to store precious records and artifacts. Cracked blocks in the pyramid indicate that it suffered one or more very severe earthquakes. Its alignment with true north was also slightly altered. The survivors of the planetary catastrophe were catapulted back into the primitive state, sustained only by dimming memories of the previous age. But the sheds of old God King systems were, did I say that right? But the shreds of old God King systems were retained in a slightly modified form. The Osiris myth gripped the Egyptians, while the people of the Mediterranean eagerly, fearfully worshipped every apparition that appeared, and as the witnesses increased in number, so did the gods. New priesthoods, clinging to remnants of old rites and old beliefs, sprang up. The same kind of manifestations that haunt us now were haunting men then. There were funny lights in the sky, usually around the sacred solstice holidays. Gifted men and women entered trances, and strange voices spilling from their lips predicted future events with unerring accuracy. Most men were plagued with bizarre coincidences. I'm thinking about my Aunt Bev. I wonder if she's doing right. My voice is starting to sound like hers. It's weird. Golden entities and dreams with flaming eyes appear before solitary travelers on the desert. History was repeating itself, as with every social political system. Ambitious, power-hungry megalomaniacs assumed control and twisted the religious beliefs of the masses to serve their own ends. Men had been keeping careful records for thousands of years, and these priceless documents were stored in the great libraries of China and Egypt until they were destroyed by fire. Wars and invasions by barbarians and sordid natural catastrophes also took a terrible toll on the human knowledge. Our heritage was lost. Our race past was obliterated. We entered a long period of abysmal ignorance, and a paranormal entity stepped across the barriers of space and time to visit with human psychics and spell out a fascinating but false history to fill the gap. The prophets, convinced that their encounters, the quaint histories narrated by the entities, these books and scrolls were stored in temples and religious places to be read aloud to gatherings of worshippers on holy days. Some of the documents were even banned from the public and became the property of esoteric priesthoods and the religious orders. Eventually, selections from these inspired writings were brought together to form the holy books of the various religions in the East and the West. And although they were widely reproduced by printing with carved wooden blocks in the Orient, the Western religions had to copy the codices tediously by hand. Priests and monks in isolated monasteries made such copies their life's work. In the process of producing new hand-illuminated versions of the old text, certain libraries were taken and archaic phrases were altered. New paragraphs were inserted, and priestly editors censored and cleaned up vast sections. The polite begatting of the latter versions displaced the graphic sexual descriptions of the originals. Some codices outline such unbelievable manifestations of the supernatural that they were declared impossible and spurious and were omitted from the latter religious texts. Religious fanatics had their own touches as the manuscripts passed from copyist to copyist, spanning whole generations. I love reading his work. It's so easy to read his books. I mean, I still stumble, but it's so much easier than, oh God, the abominable Snowman. Ivan Saunderson's work. Oh my God, that was a bitch to read. Sorry my language, but it was terrible. Anyways, it was like reading old college textbook that was written by a satirist, a newsman. It just was very difficult. I mean, I don't say I didn't learn anything from it, but it was not very thoughtful about all this. Simple folks should be the ones buying the book. I mean, how many of us know how to speak Chinese? How many, phonetics? How do we know about how words are actually said? It would be nice if there was a little help out. You know what I mean? But anyways, let's get back to this. I love Ivan Sanderson, and I will read another one of his books in the future, I'm sure. time permitting. The madman who ran the world, and the world has always been run by madmen, suppressed the religious texts and rewrote history to suit their own needs and vanity. When one leader passed away, his successor would rewrite history just as his successors would change the records he left behind. And so we had three histories to draw upon in the imaginative and mischievous historical legends spun by the entities, the censored and revised histories compiled by the court historians and the works of independent historians such as Herodias, who were greatly influenced by the first two groups and who threw in an extra measure of folklore and legend. In short, Henry Ford was right when he observed, history is bunk. Man had developed an important body of knowledge in the ancient times. He had studied the atom, astronomy, and the super spectrum, and had learned to control some of the mysterious forces of nature. But the scholars possessing this knowledge were driven underground by the religious fanatics and by evil leaders who regarded their seeming powers as a personal threat. Corrupt forms of the ancient knowledge were adopted by some priesthoods. However, the subjects like astronomy emerged from the corruptions. Even the underground scholars were corrupted and splintering into various forms of occultism, discarding everything except those practices that worked the easiest and for the most people. Witchcraft and black magic developed most rapidly since they were based upon ancient principles, from controlling to so-called elementals, the brainless forces that produce fairies, some ghosts, and kindred phenomena. The last 1,000 years before the Christian era began as an odd bag of magical beliefs and practices, pagan religions, and exploitations of the fears and superstitions of the common people by power-mad kings trying to hold together their little kingdoms. Then, in a single century, order was introduced into the chaos. Around 500 BC, I can hopefully say this right, Siddhartha Gautama, Siddhartha Gautama fell asleep under a tree in India. This is Buddha, isn't it? And when he awoke, he was filled with a great new philosophy. He denounced his worldly goods and began to preach the existence of a single supermind, a cosmic consciousness, rather than building fantasies about legends of gods and angels in a mythical heaven. He became the Buddha. Simultaneously, in far-off China, the great philosopher Lao Tzu appeared and introduced Taoism and reshaped the thinking of the Orient, along with another contemporary, Confucius. In Persia, Zoroaster founded a new religion based upon his encounters with Ahura Mazda, one of our freaked out friends from nowhere, while the biblical prophets Daniel and Zechariah were having some odd experiences of their own further west. According to the descriptions in the Bible, both of these gentlemen saw UFO type phenomena. Well, that's a little deeper than that. But it's unidentified objects, okay. But angels, whatever. I'm going to talk about that in my book. I should talk about both of those things too. I definitely talked about Abraham and Jacob and Esau. Anyways, this is hodgepodge of Roman mythology, demigods, and ancient Hebrew mythology is all this. Bahama, Buddha's monotheism swept the Far East but didn't make much headway in the West, where the Greeks, Romans, and all the people they conquered continued to worship their multitudes of mountain-dwelling deities. I just read before. Yes, this is just repeat of another book, I think. We can't say for certain that Christ introduced monotheism, but he was at least given credit for doing so. And characteristically, however, many of the early beliefs in elementals, and Druidic style magic, and Osiris theology spilled over into and were absorbed by in the emerging Christian cults. The concept of a cosmic consciousness must have been incomprehensible to the Mediterranean people, and they quickly perverted it. God became a giant humanoid sitting on an aerial throne rather than a more carefully defined energy force as expounded by Buddha. The Catholics were later to split him into the Trinity. The messengers and angels who continued to appear with regularity were swallowed up in myth and given wings and halos by the religious artists. Actually, angels were always described as resembling normal human beings, though they were sometimes surrounded by luminous glows, and they're shapeshifters too, from what I can tell. And like our modern UFOnauts, they were often described as being dressed in glittering one-piece garments, and their faces were often obscured either by some kind of covering or by a glow. And like our hairy monsters, dinosaurs, and other animated phantasms, they had an uncanny ability to vanish in the thin air. Daniel saw and other biblical personages fell flat on their faces, fainted, and lapsed into trances when the apparitions appeared. A small band of scholars known as the, well, oh boy, they got a circle though. Aritologists. So let's find out what that is, instead of assuming we know what it means. I never heard that. I might have heard it, but I never read it. Artalogist. Wonder what it means. Artologist is someone who recites or writes artologies. Artologies are a type of sacred biography that lists a deity's attributes in the first person. They are written in poem or text. Artologists. A band of scholars known as artologists still quietly study cases of contact between humans and parahumans, sifting the messages and noting comparisons. The less precise angelologists try to catalog the endless genealogies of the parahumans who claim divine origin, a task as frustrating as trying to list the names of all the planets described by the flying saucer entities. Demonologists have drawn up massive directories of names of demons and demigods who have marched in Fort's inaugural procession of the damned. We never seriously heeded the biblical warning to beware of those who pretend to represent principalities and powers. It would be more productive to join all these futile pursuits in one single broad study stripped of belief, a study that would be aptly called Chimeraology. Is there really is? Is there one? Let's see if there is one. Is there really one? I never knew that. Chimerology. I know. Chimerology. The chimerologist Ben Wordmuller. Chimerology. Chimerology. I wonder if there's actually a book called that. I would be surprised. I didn't see it. Doesn't mean it's not out there. Just gotta type in the right word. Full text of the cosmic question. Oh, let's just go straight back to. It goes back to his work. Okay. These chimeras and parahumans usually seem to be engaged in pointless exercises. Both beneath the layers of nonsense, there has always been a strain of propaganda and tactics, and identical to the tactics. So, shoot, we gotta borrow again. Yeah. Put a lot of time into reading, don't I? I guess I need to. How you doing, buddy? You hungry? You okay? Chase, are you okay?
Yeah.
You don't need anything else to eat? Let's go back because I lost track. So we're talking about propaganda and tactics identical to the tactics we now call psychological warfare, the repetition of half-truths until they are accepted as whole truths by such of the human population. The modern belief in extraterrestrial visitors springs not from the presentation of concrete evidence, but from the repetitions of the extraterrestrials' line through thousands of contactees over the past 30 years or so. All of our religious beliefs have a similar basis. Prophets who have allegedly talked with supernatural beings have spread their beliefs to masses of people who have had no direct experience with the phenomenon but are willing to accept the word of those who have. All over the world today, there are lonely people laboriously writing massive books which no one will ever read. They are inspired by their contacts with parahumans and have taken part in long conversations about everything from building the pyramids and the lost Atlantis to the great cataclysms we can expect at the end of the century. These people I have had been directly in touch with, many of them sincerely believe that they, and they alone, have enjoyed a very special privileged contact with God or Gabriel or Ashtar or Orthon. Who can say how many of the histories of the past were constructed in the very way? How many important ideas were assimilated by the human race through this process? Let's examine just one such idea. The concept of life after death and resurrection. This is really a rather complex belief and led to development of elaborate funerary practices to protect the body until the great day arrived. The legendary resurrection of Osiris, 4,000 years before Christ, convinced the Egyptians that all men would one day be lifted from their graves and granted new life. Interestingly, this was not original with the Egyptians. 30,000 years old graves in Soviet Union have yielded bodies that were buried with their worldly goods, apparently as preparation for a future resurrection. Similar practices were universal in ancient times. The question is, how did the idea of resurrection get started? Every 30,000 years, even the 30,000 years ago, men required some confirmation of their beliefs. There had to be some demonstration. The Christian world accepts resurrection because the Christ story graphically describes how his body was removed from the tomb. Perhaps a similar demonstration was staged in 40,000 BC or 4 million BC. Chimerological, the Bible account of Christ's ascension can be viewed in a new and different light. Christ was placed in a cave, and a large rock was rolled in front of the opening, sealing it, and 2 Roman guards were stationed outside to keep his followers away. And late that night, the guards heard a strange noise in the sky. A luminous object descended, and the 2 Romans found themselves paralyzed, unable to move a muscle. And while they watched helplessly, the boulder rolled away from the mouth of the cave by itself, and 3 beings in white garments came out of the luminous object and entered the cave and carried Christ's body out. One of the beings remained behind the cave and waited for Christ's followers the next morning. After announcing that Christ had been taken, the being vanished. This is how the New Testament summarizes the event. Religiouses have always assumed that the 3 beings were divine origin. Von Daniken might identify them as astronauts from some far-off planet. But the point remains, someone wanted us to believe in the resurrection. We will never know if it really happened or if it is merely described to an entranced prophet standing in a beam of light on the desert. Nor does it matter. What does matter is the story has moved millions of people 2,000 years and convinced them at least one man was physically removed from this planet by a glowing aerial object. The source for the story could only be the 2 guards, but they were paralyzed, just as many modern witnesses experience paralysis. Since UFO-induced paralysis is a symptom of trance, we cannot rely on any of the descriptions of the entranced witnesses. What they thought they saw and what really happened can be 2 different things. In our ego-motivated ignorance, we assume that this was a solitary event and was never repeated. But how can we be sure that similar resurrections have not been staged many times in many places throughout history? A contactee named Lee Childers claims he was shot to death by a stranger on a city street in the 1950s. And he woke up to find his wounds healed and strange new memories in his mind. He became Prince Neosam of the planet Saturn, and some thought he was nuts. Others believed the Prince Neosam had died on Saturn and been resurrected in Childers' body on this planet. You may scoff at Mr. Childers' story as silly and impossible, but every Easter you probably participate in a religious ceremonies that pay tribute to Christ's trip in an unidentified flying object. Perhaps the body of Osiris was removed from his pyramid in front of witnesses in much the same manner, or at least some entity from the shadowy half world described his removal to a soft-eyed prophet More rubbish has been written about the Great Pyramid than any other construction on this planet. I have lived in Egypt. I have spent many hours inside the pyramid. The biggest puzzle about the mammoth stone artifact is the fact that it was apparently never used as a tomb. There isn't the slightest bit of evidence that a pharaoh was ever placed in it. I have crept through its low passageways and walked the steep incline in its great hall, now dimly lit with naked electric bulbs, and, like all those before me, I have marveled and wondered. In the king's chamber, in the center of the pyramid, I have performed the tourist ritual of striking the side of the crude stone tub there to hear the stone ring like metal. Napoleon once stood alone in the same chamber, and when he emerged, he looked pale and shaken. His officers gathered anxiously about him, and he muttered, "Never speak to me again of this place. Never ask me what happened here." Suppose the evidence is merely missing, eaten by the ages, and suppose the pyramid was actually used to entomb a great pharaoh and all his trappings, and all his followers and slaves were gathered outside on a holy day to pay tribute, and suddenly a high-pitched whine rent the air, and the wave of heat swept over the excited crowd as a huge object slowly descended. The cleverly concealed entrance to the tomb swung open by itself, and the deceased God King came striding out, his mummy wrappings drooping off, while the crowd, prostrated and genuflected, and the God King climbed a ladder and stairway into the object and then disappeared into the sky. An event like that would make a believer out of anybody. A description of the event would be passed on for many generations. And when the followers regained their senses and stormed into the pyramid, they found it completely empty, except for the stinking odor of sulfur. All the golden artifacts that had been placed with the body were gone. A priest, seizing that moment, would mount the steps and announce that resurrection was a truth, that it worked not just for God Kings, but for every man. Then he would pass the hat from the thousands of tombs that have been found in the Egyptian desert. We know that resurrection did not work. Osiris never came back to collect 40 centuries worth of musty bones. The central problems of the chimerology are more philosophical and theological than scientific. While the effects of many of these events are medical, the only reliable investigative approach is sociological or psychological. The eighth tower manipulates a few of us through its manifestations, but it manipulates great masses of us through our belief in those manifestations and our interpretation of their meanings. During the 1960s, I wandered dazedly through old cemeteries, garbage dumps, and grave pits, haunted by the strange, seemingly intelligent lights prancing in the sky, often asking myself, what does this phenomenon want? What is it trying to teach me and all of us? These same questions plagued the men of 5000 BC, and they plagued Charles Fort The ancient answer was that the gods owned the earth and that mankind was placed here to serve them. Fort simplified this. We are property. No shit, Charles. No shit.
If you're going to try, go all the way. Otherwise, don't even start. If you are going to try, go all the way. This could mean losing girlfriends, wives, relatives, jobs, and maybe your mind.